From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. The White House vows to respond to a drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. troops over the weekend. We'll discuss the Biden administration's options for retaliation with former U.S. Ambassador to Morocco, Marc Ginsberg. And the House is back in session on watch for a Senate border deal that's already getting pushback from Speaker Johnson. We'll have more with Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar of Texas. And after Donald Trump was ordered by a jury to pay E. Jean Carroll $83 million in damages for defamation, we'll look at his mounting legal bills and known assets. But first, we begin this evening with the attack against U.S. forces in Jordan. The drone strike carried out by Iran-backed militants, leading to the first deaths of American service members since conflict erupted between Israel and Hamas on October 7th. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin reacting to the news as he met with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg earlier today.
Let me start with my outrage and sorrow for the death of 3 brave U.S. troops in Jordan and for the other troops who were wounded. The President and I will not tolerate attack on U.S. forces, and we will take all necessary actions to defend the U.S. and our troops.
Nick Wadhams, who leads Bloomberg's U.S. national security coverage, is joining me now with more. So, Nick, obviously we have learned a lot in the aftermath of this attack about who exactly perpetrated it. Iran says they did not have anything to do with it directly, and yet you do have calls coming from even some in Congress to hit Iran directly on its own soil as a result of this. What options are on the table for the Biden administration to respond to this?
Well, they do have a fair number of options, but what they've told us is obviously the death of 3 U.S. troops is going to significantly change their calculus and merit a much stronger response. So you had seen missile strikes, things like that over the last several weeks as there had been the U.S. and then Iranian proxies trading fire in Syria and Iraq and places like that. What we're hearing is that it's very unlikely that there would actually be an attack on Iran. I mean, despite what some Republicans in Congress are calling for, I mean, the risks of a broad regional conflagration as well as direct conflict between the U.S. and Iran is much more severe then. But what we've heard is essentially that they would consider much heavier attacks against these Iranian proxies in the region, in Syria and Iraq, places like that, but also potentially Iranian officials, soldiers, uniformed officers in those countries. So whereas they had shied away before from targeting Iranian assets in those countries and only going after proxies, they would essentially expand the rules of engagement. So we anticipate that in the coming days.
And of course, that's all on the offense. On the defense side, though, this was a drone that was able to attack a U.S. base. We have had reporting today that essentially there was a U.S. drone in play also at the same time that was attempting to land. Maybe there was some confusion, but should we expect that there's any bulking up of U.S. defenses in the region as well? Well,
the challenge there is the time it would take to get more air defenses. I mean, this is no small thing getting those assets to the region. But yeah, I mean, what we've essentially heard, over the time that these attacks have happened, the U.S. has had a very good track record in shooting down these one-way attack drones. But what appeared to happen in this case was there was a U.S. drone returning to the base. The air defenses got confused whether that was the attack drone, so they didn't sort of fire up, and that's how we got to this. But certainly there are going to be a lot more questions about how they avoid this in the future, precisely because of the sort of imbroglio and the situation you're seeing President Biden in as he weighs this pressure at home against the need to respond and how he's going to act the next few days.
All right, Nick Wadhams joining me from Bloomberg. Thank you so much. Now, we've also heard from the press secretary of the U.S. Defense Department, Major General Patrick Ryder. He joined Bloomberg Surveillance this morning talking about the U.S. response. Just take a listen to what he had to say on this matter.
We know that Iran is behind these groups. We're not seeking conflict with Iran. We don't seek war with Iran. But again, we will take necessary measures to protect our forces, and we will respond in a time and manner of our choosing.
Let's turn now to Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove, who covers the White House for us. So, Josh, we were just hearing from Nick about the kind of military factors the administration is considering here, why it may not be likely to actually strike Iran on its home turf. But how does politics factor in as well, especially considering this is an election year for the president? He wants a second term.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one. They really bent over backwards today in the briefing room, and I think understandably to say, like, that is not the lens that they have on this. You know, they are going to say that whatever the president's going to do is going to be because they think it's the right thing to do and not with an eye to a particular swing state or that. What we know so far is he's had a couple of meetings with his advisors, and they're saying, basically, stay tuned. We're going to hit what we decide to hit, what Biden decides to hit, and we'll let you know when that is. There's no clarity on whether that is in the coming hours, days, weeks. It's unclear. But, you know, more broadly right now, the risk for Biden is that this is sort of another sign that the overall situation in the Middle East could continue to degrade. That is weighing on him right now, in particular in states like Michigan with a large Muslim American population that is upset about ongoing American support for Israel. More broadly, if he gets kind of dragged in to conflicts, both Biden and Trump have campaigned on sort of ending, quote unquote, forever wars, as Trump would call them. So I think it would open the potential for that. Republicans will already are sort of, you know, hinting or at least staking out ground to call Biden's response too timid in their eyes. That you might even say that's why many of them are calling for a strike on Iran directly. They know maybe that Biden is unlikely or he can't do that. So the politics are swirling around this. It's a tricky situation, and just generally speaking, this is a time when voters are not keen to get involved in long-term American engagements, and of course they want to see response, justice, I guess you could say, for when American soldiers are killed or injured. Of course, significant number injured here. It's a big number. I think the 3 dead is itself very harrowing, but I think some people have lost track.
Dozens.
About 30 or so that are injured, some pretty seriously. So this is a big situation. The White House rhetoric pretty strong today on it and saying this changes the calculus for them.
Well, and of course, it all comes against the backdrop of the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. You mentioned how Biden may be running into issues with this in states like Michigan because of what's happening in Gaza. We also know in Paris over the weekend there was negotiators from Egypt, Qatar, the U.S. and Israel trying to work toward a ceasefire agreement in exchange for the release of hostages. Just how hard is the president pushing to stop the hostilities in Gaza right now?
There have been signals that they're cranking up the pressure, both publicly with statements from Biden himself and his allies that they're concerned about the casualty toll in Gaza, and privately they're sort of sending signals that they're getting a little more optimistic that this deal might come together, including today. They said that it's, you know, nothing is baked yet, but that it seems like things are moving in the right direction. Reports, of course, the CIA director among the sort of contingent of staff that Biden is sending. So I think they would like a ceasefire. I think that they would like a ceasefire. They've opened the door to having a longer one. They're not ruling out, you know, potentially one. When I say they want a pause in hostilities, I guess. They don't want a full ceasefire, So they want a pause. They're open to a longer pause. But if we're talking about a full ceasefire, a full end to the conflict, which is what progressive groups are asking for, which is what Muslim American groups are asking for. Right now, the White House is ruling that out. They think that would just be a victory for Hamas, which, of course, they say broke the ceasefire that had existed on October 6th. So right now, they want a pause. They're willing to talk about a pause as part of a hostage negotiation. They're open to a long one. You know, they've not ruled out. They've been asked about, you know, months long. You know, they've not ruled that out, but the full ceasefire, I think, is a bridge too far still for them.
All right, Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove, thank you
so
much. We want to turn now to domestic policy as well. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre today telling reporters that negotiations over a border deal are still ongoing.
We have been working in good faith and across the aisle to make real progress on one of the most important issues we are facing, securing our border. Now we need Speaker Johnson to step up and provide the authorities and resources we requested to secure the border.
Let's turn now to Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. Wendy, just earlier this afternoon, we get a tweet from the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, who says any border shutdown authority that allows even one illegal crossing is a non-starter. He's previously suggested that this deal is dead on arrival. Is this even going anywhere in the House of Representatives?
Not anywhere soon, and certainly not anywhere soon enough for border swing states, for border states, and, you know, for everyone who is dealing with this situation. 2024 politics have gotten smack in the middle of this, you know, in a way that, for example, they aren't, unlike, you know, with the Iran situation that Josh described. The border deal right now is dead on arrival in the House, partly because of some actual policy differences as you said, Mike Johnson wants 0 people coming across the border every day. Democrats are willing for 5,000 people to come across the border every day as a limit. So there's a lot of negotiating room there. And then on top of that, the Republican frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, is saying we don't need a bill at all, just elect me and I'll fix it, which, is a hard thing for some Republicans, including the ones who have been negotiating this deal, to take. For example, Senator Langford of Oklahoma, who's been working on this for weeks with Senate Democrats, is frustrated that the House Republicans are more interested in denying Biden a win than in getting this done. I mean, he's put a lot of hours into this. So that isn't going anywhere, and not much else is this week.
Well, what about a tax deal, Wendy? Because we haven't even seen the text of the border deal yet, but we do know what that bill looks like, and it could theoretically go to the floor this week or next, right?
It could. It could. If that moves along, we could actually see some movement on that bill. However, again, Freedom Caucus members, who are the most sort of Trump diehard conservatives on the House side, House Republican side, who are in the majority, they also don't want to give Democrats another election year win by expanding the child tax credit, even though it would also give them a win in lowering some business taxes. So, it's almost like they should all go home until November because they seem to keep tripping over the election here in trying to get anything passed. But we may see that this week. You're right.
All right, Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, thank you so much. Meantime, another story we have our eye on today, the U.S. Treasury reducing its estimate for federal borrowing for the current quarter, a move unexpected by many dealers, helping stoke rallies in bonds and stocks today. The Treasury Department said it now estimates $760 billion in net borrowing for January through March. That's down from a previous prediction of $816 billion released in late October. Treasury set their highs of the day after that release. Now, coming up, we'll turn back to what's going on in the Middle East. Former U.S. Ambassador to Morocco, Marc Ginsberg, will be with us. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We do not seek another war. We do not seek to escalate. But we will absolutely do what is required to protect ourselves, to continue that mission, and to respond appropriately to these attacks.
That was John Kirby, spokesman for the NSC at the White House briefing earlier today, responding to questions about the drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. service members and injured dozens more. And retired Admiral James Stavridis wrote about the administration's response and what it should look like in a new Bloomberg opinion column today, saying, quote, the Pentagon should generate detailed strike plans to go after Iranian targets themselves. These could include warships operating in support of Yemen's Houthis. Another target set could be Iranian oil and gas platforms in the Arabian Gulf. Even more controversially, the Pentagon could consider strikes against Iranian military command and control sites. Let's bring in now former U.S. Ambassador to Morocco and founding president of the Coalition for a Safer Web, Marc Ginsberg. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me here. What response from the U.S. would be appropriate enough in terms of strength without being inappropriate in terms of the degree to which it escalates tensions in the Middle East?
Well, the problem here is that I think we're in a false equation. We've lost the balance of deterrence against Iran over the last several months. There have been over 160 attacks against American installations since October 7th, Gaza war began, number one. And number two, Iran keeps trying to assert that it has no responsibility or direct control over these proxy groups. Well, that's like saying Donald Trump had nothing to do with January 6th. The fact of the matter is that as long as the United States merely sees this as a retaliation for an attack, we are going to continue to be attacked by these proxies, which is one of the reasons why I feel the equation has to be changed. We have got to go militarily against Iran's, shall we say, drone factory manufacturing facilities, which not only were used to attack this base, but are being used by Iran to ship to Russia to attack Ukraine. Okay?
So,
I feel that would be.
Do you mean to say the U.S. should strike Iran directly on home turf?
Yes, absolutely. Number one, this argument that there's going to be an escalation of this conflict. Well, what is Iran going to do? Okay, we already know that Iran could, in effect, tell Hezbollah to accelerate its attacks against Israel. What else is Iran going to do? The United States has enough forces in the region to deter Iran missile attacks. What is really needed also is a political equation. We have long taken off the table, and we need to put back on the table the one thing that the Iranians fear the most, which is regime destabilization. The United States continues to act as if Iran's terrorist regime somehow or other should be the status quo of the day, of the year, of the century. Destabilizing that regime by supporting its opposition groups without publicly declaring it, that would be the most important message we could send to the Iranians.
But does this not risk destabilizing the wider Middle East? I mean, we're talking about a power here that has been developing its nuclear capability.
Well, and again, that's all the more reason because Iran has already violated every tenet of the International Atomic Energy Agency's mechanisms of inspection. They're on the cusp of a nuclear weapon. And, well, what would happen 3 months from now if Iran declares that it has already test-fired a nuclear weapon or has the missile capacity to do so? Would we retaliate anywhere without fear of a wider conflict? This is one of the reasons why we are in this false equation that the administration has created, that somehow an escalation is going to lead to a wider conflict.
Well, I wonder if de-escalation, though, in other areas could actually bring a similar end result here. There are active talks underway to establish a ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel, exchange hostages in return for their stopping hostilities in Gaza for some period of time. If proxies like the Houthis are acting, as they say, in support of Hamas right now, if Hamas were no longer to be in active conflict with Israel, could this solution be one that solves this without actually there having to be these additional actions that the U.S. would undertake?
Well, partly so. I think in the end, Hezbollah already has telegraphed that it would not be attacking northern Israel if there was a permanent ceasefire. Whether the Houthi rebels decide to do so, if there is a ceasefire with Hamas, they've asserted there will be, but who knows? The Iran militant groups in Iraq and Syria are an entirely other equation. They're there to try to force the United States out of the Middle East. They are the most important proxies that Iran has directed against American troops. And so I don't believe that they are going to cease fire and stop harassing American forces, even though there may be a ceasefire for whatever duration it may be in Gaza.
All right, Ambassador, thank you so much for your time this evening. We appreciate your thoughts. Former Ambassador Marc Ginsberg. Now, coming up, we'll turn to more domestic affairs, and not the current administration, but the former one, and the former leader of it. Former President Donald Trump has to pay millions and millions of dollars in civil damages, potentially. How does that stack up against the actual cash he has on hand? We'll discuss that with Bloomberg's Eric Larson next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The big whammy here, the punitive damages, were only about 3.5 times the compensatory damages. So a lot of times appellate courts will say, it's way out of whack, let's reduce the punitives. But that's not the case here. Plus, if they want to dispute the evidence that was admitted into trial, well, tough luck, because Trump's overmatched attorney, Alina Habba, did not object to a lot of the evidence. And so you waive your right to appeal it. So I think this verdict will stand. It's a question of when the money will flow to Eugene Carroll.
Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg speaking with me earlier today as former President Donald Trump faces a pair of major legal verdicts in New York that could put the billionaire's cash pile at risk. Joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg's Eric Larson. So, Eric, he's been ordered to pay $83 million in the E. Jean Carroll case. He could potentially be on the hook for more than $300 million in the civil fraud trial in New York. Does he have enough to pay out these damages and then pay his attorneys on top of that?
Well, according to a recent Bloomberg Billionaires Index estimate, he does. He has about $600 million in liquid assets. The former president himself testified under oath in a deposition in the New York Attorney General case that he had more than $400 million in cash. So, theoretically, he would have enough to pay what could end up being $450 million or more if he were to completely lose this New York fraud civil trial. We're expecting a decision anytime on the damages, and the state is seeking $370 million in that case.
And Eric, as we know, this is not just a former president. It is an active presidential candidate who has been fundraising off of the back of these many legal challenges he's facing. What can he use the money from donors for in these legal fights? They can't pay damages to E. Jean Carroll, right?
No, the Federal Election Commission would frown on that. I spoke with some experts about that because we've heard a lot about how donated money has been used to pay legal fees, and there are ways that Trump and his campaign have argued that that money can rightfully be used to pay fees that relate to his time in office or challenges related to his presidential duties. I don't think that would fly with damages for essentially a defamation case stemming from a sexual assault and also allegations of fraud spanning over a decade at his company.
Well, and those are just civil cases he's facing. As we well know, he's facing many criminal cases as well. And there actually is still a question that is sitting in the Court of Appeals here in Washington right now around presidential immunity. He argues that because he was president, he cannot be prosecuted in Jack Smith's 2020 election interference case. When could we get a decision on that immunity question, Eric? What's taking so long?
I wish I could tell you. We've been waiting for this for days now. The oral arguments in court happened a while ago. We have been expecting it really at any moment. It's really a pretty huge ruling. Depending on what we get out of it, say if Trump were to lose on the immunity decision, as he did at the lower court level, he could seek a rehearing by a larger panel of judges at the federal circuit court there in Washington, and then, of course, potentially take it to what would no doubt be a landmark Supreme Court case if they accepted it.
Well, of course, the Supreme Court has to consider the 14th Amendment question as well. They'll be hearing arguments in that case next week. Bloomberg's Eric Larson, thank you so much for joining us on the myriad legal challenges facing the former president. And of course, coming up, we have to talk about the former president's influence on Congress when it comes to a border deal, because President Biden is signaling concessions on the border, but the House Speaker may not think that's enough. We'll be joined by Democratic Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
It is interesting. Republicans 4 months ago would not give funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for our southern border because we demanded changes in policy. So we actually locked arms together and said, we're not going to give you money for this. We want a change in law. And now it's interesting, a few months later, when we're finally getting to the end, they're like, oh, just kidding. I actually don't want a change in law because it's a presidential election year.
That was Republican Senator of Oklahoma, James Lankford, one of the negotiators trying to reach an agreement on a border deal with the White House, a deal that may not get a very warm reception in the House of Representatives. Joining me now is a member of that body, Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar of Texas. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, actually was just posting on the social media platform X this afternoon. He said any border shutdown authority that allows even one illegal crossing is a non-starter. He has previously called this border deal, based on reports he was seeing of its contents, dead on arrival in the House of Representatives. How confident are you that you will even get a chance to vote yes or no on this bill?
It's Republicans for a long time have been saying there's a border crisis. Let's go ahead and change the policy. And we're not going to do Ukraine funding and Israel funding till we make some changes on the border. So finally, I got to hand it to Senator Langford and to Senator Murphy and Sinema. They did what they needed to do. I think they're almost done with it. But now they're saying, oh, we're not going to do it after a while because it's a good campaign ad. It's very sad that we're getting to this point. I mean, without due respect to the speaker, very good man, but I don't think he's even read the bill. I mean, none of us have seen the final text. So how can you say no to this? And by the way, operational control, not even President Trump had operational control. No president had. That means you got to stop 100%. You can reach that as a goal, try to go for that for a goal, but no president, including President Trump, has gone operational control, which means that not a single person can come across.
Well, of course, President Trump has said that no deal is better than a bad deal when it comes to the border. But I want to ask you specifically about the president currently sitting in the Oval Office. President Biden, late on Friday, put out a statement encouraging Congress to pass this bipartisan legislation. He noted that it would give him new presidential authority to shut down the border when it becomes overwhelmed. And he said he would use that authority immediately upon signing this legislation into law. I've asked Republican colleagues of yours about that, and they suggested to me that he already has that authority. He just isn't using it right now. How much blame do you think should be put on President Biden for what we're seeing at the southern border?
Well, you know, and I've disagreed with some of his policies in the past when it came to border security, but now he's saying that he's willing to sign probably one of the most conservative border bills that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years. And now the Republicans don't want to even give him that opportunity to send it to his desk. So I find that very ironic. And by the way, except for two Republicans that are serving in the House right now, the last two appropriation bills on Homeland, where we added $2.5 billion, they all voted no to add more money to border security. So you're saying no money for border security except for two Republicans. And now they don't even want to change the policy to give that to the president. So I find it very ironic that they are more interested in political attacks than actually policy solutions.
Well, sir, if politics get in the way from the president actually having a chance to sign legislation like this into law, what would you like to see him do unilaterally? What authorities should he exercise to address the border?
You know, the president has, and again, I want to see those changes, but the president has a lot of power. He has that discretion to do certain things. Look at what Secretary J. Johnson Obama did. They were able to detain and deport people under Title VIII. They didn't use Title 42. They used the existing law right now. And they were able to probably have more detention and more deportations than even President Trump. So there's a lot of things he can use right now. And if the Republicans say no to working this border deal, or at least put it to a vote, I would ask the president to use Title VIII, use the existing authorities, and detain people and deport people, because right now we probably have the largest amount of beds that we've had in a long time, detention beds, close to 38,000, 39,000, where in the past they've been 34,000. So there is space there, and he can always use that law, Title VIII, to deport people.
I want to ask you about a proposal coming from your Democratic colleague from Maine, Congressman Jared Golden. He released a statement today that reads in part, should this bipartisan bill pass the Senate, if Speaker Johnson wants the bill to be stronger, he should put it on the floor and amend it to add $1 of new border wall funding for every dollar sent to Israel and Ukraine. Let us vote. Of course, Israel and Ukraine, the other factor in these conversations. What do you think of Mr. Golden's proposal?
Jared's a good friend of mine. I support Israel, and I think they should be two separated things. I don't believe in the wall. I think a wall is a 14th century solution. I certainly would ask him to look at another proposal, but add $1 for every dollar we send to Israel for a border wall. I would say, for me, that's a non-starter. We can look at funding Israel, which I support Israel, fight against Hamas. But to say border wall, the border wall has not been very effective for border security. And I'll tell you why. Look at the numbers in December, 10, 12,000 people a day. Now they've gone to half or maybe a little bit half. Did we build a new border wall? No. Did we add new border patrol? No. Was it Governor Abbott's Lone Ranger work down there at the border? No. You know what it was? Mexico started to enforce its immigration laws. And when Mexico does its work at the 20-yard line, that is the southern border with Guatemala, guess what? The numbers go down. So we have to play defense not only in the 1-yard line, but also on the 20-yard line and make sure that Mexico does its work.
Well, let's talk about the work done by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, because while this border deal is very much a question this week as to whether or not you will have a chance to vote on it, you also may have a chance to vote on whether Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached. They'll be marking up those articles of impeachment tomorrow. Has Mayorkas, in your mind, committed high crimes and misdemeanors, sir?
Under the Constitution, high crimes and misdemeanors, certainly policy differences don't fall under that. If the Republicans were serious about the border, impeaching the secretary doesn't do one single thing in stopping the numbers at the border. Keep in mind, except for 2 Republicans, the last 2 years where we added $2.5 billion for CBP, except for 2, they all voted no to add new money. So they don't want to add new monies. They voted not to add new monies. They don't want to make policy changes. They only want to impeach the secretary. And I disagree on some things he does. But impeaching the secretary doesn't stop one single person. Nobody in Guatemala or in Mexico is going to say, oh, guess what? The Republicans impeached the secretary, so we're not going to go into the U.S. It's not very productive.
And finally, Congressman, just in our final moment with you, I'd like to ask you about another subject, because you also may have the opportunity this week, maybe next, to vote on a bipartisan bicameral tax deal that in exchange for certain business tax credits would expand the child tax credit. Do you plan to support that bill? How many of your Democratic colleagues do you think will?
Well, again, it depends on Speaker Johnson, whether he's going to put it up for a vote. I do understand the New Yorkers, the Republicans, don't like it because it doesn't address the SALT issue. But again, I will support it, at least for what I've seen. I will support it because it does help small businesses to make sure they get the deductions, because it is the small businesses that create about two-thirds of all the jobs that we have. At the same time, it helps working families through the child tax credit. So it's a win-win situation for families and for small businesses, the job created. So the answer is yes, I will support it if the speaker puts it on the floor.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it. That is Democratic Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas. Now, coming up, Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley is not backing down, vowing to stay in the 2024 race through Super Tuesday. We'll have more on that next with our political panel. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This bipartisan agreement would deliver the resources the president asked for in his supplemental, like 1,300 new Border Patrol agents, 375 new immigration judges, 1,600 new asylum officers, 100 cutting-edge inspection machines to catch fentanyl. It would also provide a president with a new emergency authority to secure our border when it becomes overwhelmed.
That was White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre earlier today addressing a border deal negotiated by senators in the White House that we could actually see the text of this week. Joining us now is our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. So, Rick, just to begin with you, even if we do see a deal, we know that President Trump isn't super eager to see it actually passed in Congress. If you had to put odds on this actually becoming law, knowing the former president is weighing in, how low would you put them?
Look, I mean, that's a hurdle, right? I mean, he's got firm control of the speaker, it looks like. They talk a lot. The speaker wants to do what he can to make Trump happy because, surprise, surprise, they need Trump in order to win a majority next cycle. So it's all about job protection. That being said, I'm really impressed by how much heat is on the House Republicans today. I mean, this has been a drumbeat with Republicans and Democrats like Congressman Cuellar, who know the border and understand the history there, and are saying this is the one chance we have in decades to do something that could actually be very beneficial, and we need to act now. So can that heat that's being drawn onto the House Republicans for a bill that no one's actually seen yet, so we're still in the preliminaries, but will that result in a potential vote where the Speaker puts it on the floor and lets people vote their conscience?
Well, Jeannie, if you're a sitting House Republican, one that's running for re-election, what is a more dangerous proposition for you? Potentially defy former President Trump and face the consequences, or risk not being able to say you did something about border security when voters are heading to the polling booth?
You know, it's a hard decision all around. I think what we're hearing from House Republicans, but for the most part, obviously there are exceptions, is that, number one, to Rick's point, they haven't seen the text yet, but what they're hearing, they don't feel like it goes far enough. So I think what they will try to use is the same argument Donald Trump has been making for the last several days, which is to say this bill is so imperfect that we cannot support it. And so they will try to surmount the problem that they're going to have with constituents being angry. And, you know, one fight that I think we should underscore here is this is not just a battle between Donald Trump and, Joe Biden. It's also a battle between Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. I mean, there is no love lost. They haven't, talked apparently in 3 years. And of course, this first is going to be a battle in the Senate, and those two are going to go after each other. But again, to Rick's point, they do need each other as well. So it's going to be a fascinating soap opera over there.
Well, there's also an ongoing primary battle between former President Trump and Nikki Haley. She actually weighed in on this issue as well in one of the Sunday shows over the weekend. Just take a listen to what she had to say.
If you're going to go and basically tell the American people that you're going to go and decide who the nominee is after only 2 states have voted, 48 states out there, this is a democracy. The American people want to have their say in who is going to be their nominee. We need to give them that. You can't do that based on just 2 states. And not only that, it's 1,215 delegates to reach the nomination. Donald Trump has 32. I have 17. So let's let this play out. Let's do what we need to.
And Rick, she suggested that she does not need to win her home state of South Carolina, that she just needs to do better there than she did in New Hampshire to go on to Super Tuesday. She had more than 40% of the vote in New Hampshire. Can she pull that off in South Carolina?
Look, a masterful job of managing expectations, right? I did a little bit better in New Hampshire than I did in Iowa, and I plan to do a little bit better in South Carolina. So she doesn't only have to do about 45% to meet her own threshold. She doesn't have to win to trigger her own ability to continue to campaign. So I think she's doing a masterful job. The question's going to be for her, do the donors agree with that? Because she's relatively unknown in these, out primaries, especially the Super Tuesday primaries. It's awful hard to campaign in 16 states in a couple of weeks. And so the real question for her is going to be, how long does the donors give her money in order to extend her campaign? I can't imagine they'd cut her off after South Carolina if she doesn't win, but that is a potential.
Well, there's going to be a big donor event where you are, Jeannie, tomorrow. Big Wall Street names like Ken Langone or Stan Druckenmiller are going to be hosting an event for Nikki Haley. If there's no sign that the tap is turning off, why not continue the campaign?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, these people defying a threat by Donald Trump, who said, if you continue to support her, you are no longer a part of our MAGA coalition. They don't seem to be too concerned. And, the problem for Nikki Haley is that she has a future beyond the 2024 election, or she wants to have one. She is, the leading contender besides Donald Trump for the Republican nomination. She is young. She's charismatic. She's got a lot of support. She beat out all those fellas, as she likes to say. And so she wants a future after all of this. And that's going to be a key consideration for her as well, because if she's going to get out, she should get out gracefully in a way that protects her ability to run again going forward. Because, of course, even if Donald Trump wins, as we so often heard, he can only serve 1 term, and we will go through this all over again in 2028.
All right.
Sorry,
Well,
Kaylee.
Rick and Jeannie, stay with me. It's all right. We've cast our eyes on South Carolina as it pertains to the Republican primary race, but President Biden paid a visit to that state over the weekend as well. So we'll have more on that with Rick and Jeannie coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Donald Trump knows this economy is good and strong and getting stronger. He knows that while it's good for America, it's bad for him politically. Trump also said the one president he doesn't want to be is Herbert Hoover. Well, Donald, it's too late. There are only two presidents in American history who left office with fewer jobs than they took office. Herbert Hoover and, yes, Donald Herbert Hoover Trump.
That was President Biden speaking to supporters in South Carolina this weekend. Back with us is our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. So, Jeannie, just to begin with you, obviously the president is looking to South Carolina to make sure he still has support shored up in his key demographics, black voters included. Is he doing enough?
You know, he is starting. I think he's had a very, very good last week and beginning of this week. Many of us felt he got a little bit of a slow start towards the campaign, but since New Hampshire, they have indeed heated up, and I think he's doing a good job. He's got to keep pushing messages like that one about the reality of the economy, the reality of Trump's economy versus his own, and the numbers tell the truth, and he's got to keep being out there talking about that. And of course, he's got to, of course, be worried about these black pastors who have come out for a peace settlement for Gaza. That's a really, really big issue that the White House has got to be concerned about.
Well, Jeannie, I'm glad you brought that up. More than 1,000 black pastors representing hundreds of thousands of congregants nationwide pushing for this ceasefire. That just speaks to the pressure this administration is under in terms of its handling of the Middle East, especially in light of what we saw over the weekend, 3 troops killed in a drone attack in Jordan. How should the president be moving forward?
It's going to be a very careful dance for him. You know, I was struck by several of the clergy and pastors who signed this letter, and they have been out in full force since October, but very vocal now, saying that they have never seen black voters galvanized on an issue the way they are in Gaza, that they see themselves in with the Palestinians, and they are going to have a hard time getting them out to vote for the president unless the administration pushes Israel for a ceasefire. They are determined, and they are saying they are being pushed from the ground up on this. So this is a big concern for the White House. The White House has met with the pastors. They have got to keep meeting and pushing towards some kind of peace, which they are currently trying to do right now. But it's an uphill battle for them.
Well, Rick, they also were trying to formulate a response to that attack on U.S. troops, not just the 3 killed, but dozens injured as well by Iranian-backed militants. How difficult is this political calculus for the administration, knowing he is facing pressure to go against Iran, perhaps in a stronger way than we have seen thus far, but also considering these domestic factors?
Yeah, and this administration hasn't distinguished itself on military decisions they've made as far back as Afghanistan withdrawal, which really started to undermine his presidency at the time. So you're right, he's under a lot of pressure. He's got to be very forceful. I mean, it's not shocking anybody that we've lost servicemen in this attack. There have been over 150 attacks on U.S. service personnel in that region since the attack from Gaza into Israel. There's only so much they can do to get Israel to try and back off casualties in the civilian sector. They're going to have to hope that all that sorts of repairs itself over time between now and the spring. But now that the tide has turned, and it's up to the United States to figure out what its relationship with Iran is going to be. And this is an administration that invested heavily in a deal on nuclear, and so they've got a bad reputation when it comes to coddling Iran. And so what is going to be their forceful reaction? We've heard a lot of calls for attacks into Iran itself, both in their nuclear programs, but also in their drone programs, all of which could potentially help the war in Ukraine if we hit the drone factory. So there are a lot of choices for him to make. The question is, how is he, as commander-in-chief, going to conduct himself at a time when he's also running for re-election?
Yeah, well, he has promised there will be a response, that those who are responsible will be held to account at a time and in a manner of his choosing. We just wait for more information on what manner that is and at what time the U.S. will decide to strike. Thank you very much, as always, to our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, for joining us. And, of course, for more on all things Washington, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find that on the terminal and online. And you can find me back here on Balance of Power tomorrow alongside Joe Matthew. He'll be back. Thank you so much for joining this evening. This is Bloomberg.